or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from in Canada or anywhere in the world. Welcome to Crazy Talk. For those of you who are tuning in for the very first time, Crazy Talk is a Facebook Live TV talk show where we talk about all things related to mental health. I have the great privilege of meeting all different people. We've got people with all sorts of degrees behind their name, people with lived experience, people who I had the good luck to meet at conferences and may have no professional qualifications whatsoever, but are still amazing experts. We talk to them all. So, and if this is not your first time joining us on Crazy Talk, welcome back. Really glad to have you. So today's episode is a very special episode. I'm really excited to be joined by Michelle Hébert-Boyd. Michelle is a writer, social worker, and mental health advocate. She's worked on the front lines in community and as a senior policy advisor to a minister of health. She lives with anxiety and has recovered from an eating disorder and is currently the executive director of Eating Disorders Nova Scotia. Michelle believes that those of us who maintain recovery from mental illness can light the way forward for others. She blogs about balancing supporting a child with mental illness, a parent with dementia, and her own mental health challenges at www.baloneyinthemiddle.com. And we will put a link to that in the comments at the end of this show. So hi, Michelle. How's it going?
Good. How are you doing? Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you on the show. So you are the executive director of Eating Disorders Nova Scotia, which anyone who's kind of been following my page for a long time knows that I'm a huge fan of the work that Eating Disorders Nova Scotia does. Really great resource for everyone in the Maritimes. But I mean, Eating Disorders Nova Scotia, people often don't necessarily think about going into that line of work unless they have some sort of personal connection. So can you tell us a little bit about why you got involved in this line of work to begin with?
Apart from the fact that Shalene Jones forced me to. No, that's part of it. No, but I think like so many people in this line of work, you do go into it because you have a personal connection to it. And for me, I have recovered from an eating disorder quite a long time ago now. And I do feel that personal, I don't know, maybe responsibility is too strong a word, but to help other people out who've been through it. Because when I went through my recovery, it was very, a long time ago, and it was very isolating. There wasn't much out there for people. And so when I became aware of the work that Eating Disorders Nova Scotia was doing, I was just so heartened to see that there is support out there for people now. And there's so much more to be done, but at least we're talking about it, which 20 years ago we were not doing. So people who know me know that I do love to talk. So talking about things is a good thing for me. And I'm a storyteller, and I like to help people tell their stories because I think that there's power in reclaiming your own story of what's happened to you and in sharing that with other people who can learn from it and benefit from your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to give a quick shout out to Rudy, who just commented hello from Los Angeles. I know it is super early in the morning in LA, so Rudy, glad that you could join us. And yeah, Michelle, like a lot of what you were talking about, it reminds me of this quote that I end off a lot of my presentations with. It's by a writer named Wesley King. And he wrote, "I cannot unknow the monsters, but I can become the person who would have saved 13-year-old me." Yeah. And that it informs a lot of the work that I do. And it sounds like it kind of informs some of the work that you do as well. That whole, like, almost a sense of obligation to our past selves in some way, if that makes sense.
It's become very, very personal that way. And I think for lots of, my background's in social work as well. And I think lots of us who become something in the helping professions do that because we're trying to heal part of ourselves. And that's definitely the case for me, I suppose. I was looking for answers for myself to help with my own recovery and maintaining my recovery, but also finding ways to reach out and support other people to do that.
Yeah, and that whole idea of reaching out and supporting other people, I know Eating Disorders Nova Scotia, a big part of what you guys do is peer support, and you've recently launched like this gigantic online peer support thing that's going really, really well. Mm-hmm. So can you tell us a little bit about just like that sense of community that peer support can provide, and that's how important that is for eating disorder recovery or, any mental health recovery?
Yeah. So in the past, we've provided peer support one-to-one, face-to-face, and also in groups. And for a small organization like us, even though we're called Eating Disorders Nova Scotia, we're really based in Halifax because we just don't have the capacity and the resources to reach every part of Nova Scotia. So the one-to-one part was really hard. We get calls from all across the province, people wanting that kind of intensive peer support relationship. And you know that peer support isn't counseling or therapy. It's really the guidance and the support and hope from someone who has already gone through recovery. And for a lot of people in Nova Scotia who don't have access to mental health resources in their community, peer support is something that can really help them on the road. And it was frustrating to not be able to connect people that way. And our peer support groups were really popular, but we also knew that there were people who weren't comfortable going to them. But sometimes people who don't fit the stereotype that society has of someone with an eating disorder. So maybe they aren't the thin teenage white woman that the media likes to focus on. Maybe they're living in a larger body. Maybe they're a person of color. Maybe they're a man. Maybe there are so many other factors because anyone can get an eating disorder. And yet the stigma is that only a certain person gets it. So we were trying to think of ways that we could make our peer support more welcoming to a wider group of people and reach more people cost effectively because we don't have the resources to reach everyone who wants it. So online peer support seemed like the way to go. When I first started going through recovery back in the 90s when the internet was shiny and new, the first place I turned for help was online because I didn't know anyone in person who had an eating disorder. And the health professionals that I turned to for help didn't really know what to do with me either. So back then, the internet wasn't necessarily a healthy place for people with eating disorders. There was a lot of pro-Ana stuff out there, and there still is. But I kept thinking of that as I was working on our peer support programs and, you know, how great it would be to have an anonymous way to access what we offer. And I know that for me personally, although peer support would have been wonderful, I would have been very intimidated to actually go to a group and admit to people that I had an eating disorder and to commit to being there every week for 10 weeks or 12 weeks. So something much more informal than that, where I could go, I didn't even necessarily have to say something. I didn't have to let people know who I was or where I was, but I could still benefit from that sense of community and connecting to people would have been so valuable. So yeah, it all comes down to what would have been good for me, right? But yeah, so then when I started exploring that idea more around online support, I thought, you know, this is something that could really work and could help us reach people in all corners of the province and beyond, because really it's open to anyone with a Canadian IP address. So people in New Brunswick and Prince Edward Island, any part of Canada can join this as well, and have already in the first 2 weeks that we've been offering it.
Yeah, which is fabulous and such a great resource for anyone who might be struggling across Canada. And I can relate so much to what you said in terms of like the internet kind of being that first place to explore all sorts of things related to eating disorders, both positive and negative, because I know that was definitely my experience as well. I joined Tumblr, which I know has like a really bad rap now, but I was, you know, the Tumblr era growing up, and I joined as like a Fitspo person, you know. I was like, I was all about the smoothies and the sit-ups and like whatever. And it was through that kind of community, like the greater Tumblr community, that I started realizing that like my relationship to, you know, food and exercise was really profoundly unhealthy. And seeing other people who were going through similar things kind of inspired me to reach out on my own as well. But like you said, I mean, there were groups on the UNB campus where I was going to school that were in-person groups, and I didn't start accessing them until like fourth year university because I was so afraid of, you know, going there and particularly like being seen by other people and not being seen in like a, oh, I can't believe Lee Thomas is here, but like being seen in like a physical way, like people look at me and going like, you couldn't possibly have an eating disorder, and me being like, you're right, I'm a fraud. You know what I mean?
Enough, which is such a common thought for people who have eating disorders anyway. I mean, when people phone us for the first time for help, the comment is very often, I don't know if I actually have an eating disorder because I don't think I look like I have an eating disorder. Or maybe they've even been told that by a health professional. So, we're finding that people have reached out for help, and maybe it didn't go so well for them. So the online support is a more comfortable place. Again, this was a long time ago, but when I first reached out for help, I felt like I had really hit the bottom. And I went to a doctor in this small town in British Columbia where I was living. And he had never met anyone who actually had an eating disorder and knew very little about them. But he wanted to help. So he sent me to Weight Watchers. And I had anorexia.
Yeah. Oh
and he sent me to Weight Watchers because he thought that at least maybe the nutrition information would be helpful. Because there was nothing else in the community for me. So I went, and oh my Lord, the people there, it was all women, and they were like, so they had to weigh me, right? That was part of what they do there. And they said, well, how much do you want to lose? I said, well, no, I'm actually here because, and I explained why. And it was like a collective gasp in the room. It was like, and they literally pushed me out the door. Like I had to reach back and get my coat. And they're like, you can't stay here. You can't stay here. And I did not come forward again for help for another 2.5 years because it was just like, I don't have anywhere to go. I don't have anyone I can tell. And it's horrifying to people if I do. So yeah, that's an extreme example. And that was from a long time ago. But we do know from what people tell us that even now, when they go forward to their family doctor for help, especially if they're, experiencing something like binge eating disorder, their doctors are saying, well, you just need to go on a diet, or they'll send them to Weight Watchers, or, I'm crapping on Weight Watchers, but sorry, or some other diet program, or they just won't believe them. They're like, well, you do not look like you have an eating disorder. Just stop doing that thing and, move on. Not even recognizing that this isn't a diet thing. It's a mental illness.
Yeah, and the whole idea that, it's not necessarily about food is still something that I think a lot of people really struggle with. And this is my own personal theory that I'm going to share with you. Because my background's with bulimia. And so I feel like there is a lot of stigma around things like eating disorders where there's the illusion of choice is what I call it. Yeah. Because people, even now, there is still such a stigma around eating disorders. And I think people are slowly coming around to the idea, and not saying that there's not a stigma against other mental health issues, because there still is, but people are slowly coming around to the idea that, you're not choosing to be sad, or you're not choosing to feel anxious, or, you're not choosing to whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. And I know that I have experienced a lot more stigma around my bulimia than I have around my bipolar disorder, because people are like, oh, you don't choose to have these super out of context moods. Yeah. But the bulimia, they're like, why would you choose to do that? But that illusion of choice, because it's action based.
Yes.
And so people are just just stop doing it.
Or that's a vanity issue, that it's, oh, you're so concerned with how. No, that's not what's happening at all. But you're right. And I know that you have feelings about Bell Let's Talk and things, and as do I. But, it's great that people at least one day a year are out there saying, oh, I have anxiety, I have depression, I have whatever. And at least, feel more comfortable to talk about it than they did 20 years ago or even 10 years ago. But with eating disorders, there's still this kind of ooh, yeah, that's a whole other thing. And let's just not talk about that. Yeah, because it's action based.
Yeah, and I do a lot of I still go around to schools and I do the whole motivational speaking thing, overcoming adversity, all that sort of stuff. And I always tell schools, I talk about mental health because I do talk about mental health, but a lot of what I talk about is my experience with eating disorders. And every once in a while, this doesn't happen often, but every once in a while someone will go, well, you talked about eating disorders the whole time. I thought you were going to talk about mental health. And I was like, let me get on my copy of the DSM for you, I guess. I don't know what else I can do.
Yeah. Well, and I think people who are in recovery from eating disorders find that the stigma doesn't end when the active illness does too, because the people around you who know that you had an eating disorder, whether they're friends or just acquaintances, depending on how open you are about your experience, will always be looking at you. Like there is always, because there is that action there more than there is with something like bipolar or borderline personality. There's something that they can watch you do. They can watch your relationship with food in a way that they can't with other mental issues. And so you're always feeling like you have to prove yourself or be the poster child for recovery with eating disorders in a way that I never feel with anxiety. It's, yeah.
Yeah. And there's just so much like that's tricky to like pull apart with that, right? Like that, because there is, I think, even in people who are recovering, there's still this pressure to look a certain way, even in recovery, if that makes sense. Like, we're expected for people to, don't engage in these behaviors, but still look the way that you did when you were engaging in these behaviors. You know what I mean? Like I've gained weight since I stopped making myself throw up, but
yeah.
There's this expectation of like, isn't there a different way you could have recovered? Isn't there a way that you could have recovered and still looked thinner?
Yeah. Exactly. And we're finding a lot more people coming forward to us for support now who are, over age of 40. And we have a group going on right now for people with binge eating disorder or compulsive overeating. And we have people in their 60s in this group who have never come forward for support before because they didn't think there was any place for them. And the medical profession didn't recognize it as an issue. So we know now that as women and men go through midlife changes, there's this whole other expectation about how to live and how to look that maybe wasn't there in the past. That pressure to still have a certain kind of body and look a certain way and engage in certain activities is there's much more pressure now than there used to be for our parents' generation. So for someone like me who's in her late 40s, there's still this expectation you have to, look a certain way. And as your body starts to change and hormones kick in or kick out and life, moves along and your body does things that you're a little alarmed about, it becomes this whole other experience with disordered eating that, maybe someone who recovered from something in their 20s or 30s now finds that, oh God, this is happening again in a different way. And I'm not sure why. So, and that's something that there isn't a huge amount of research about. We're just really starting to talk about. And certainly people haven't wanted to come forward for peer support or other kinds of support because of that stereotype that it's a teenage problem.
Yeah. And I think there's still this, because culturally we have such a weird, like fat phobic and like really twisted idea of what health looks like and all this kind of stuff. And what I found is that people they're okay with some behaviors. It gets to a point where it makes them uncomfortable, right? Like, so binging and purging, people are like, oh, no, we're not okay with that. But if someone, is saying I'm at the gym because I'm working off what I ate, people are like, oh, yeah, that adds up. That makes sense. Without seeing those as, pieces of the same puzzle.
Yeah, the diet culture stuff is just so toxic. And it's so acceptable. We were talking about that in a peer support training session this morning, just how to deal with that water cooler talk at your workplace. When people like start saying, oh my God, I had a piece of cake, I'm so bad, and putting those real value judgments in what you eat and how you look. And you go out for lunch with your coworkers or friends, and it becomes a competition about who's eating less and how much you're criticizing what you're eating and denigrating what you're doing. It's, diet culture. Ugh.
So if someone else is watching this, and if someone is watching this and going, oh, you're right, diet culture, if someone wants to challenge that kind of in their own lives, do you have any tips and tricks on how people can kind of challenge that whole diet culture narrative that is so pervasive in our society, or how to survive it, if not change it?
I have a couple of people in my life who are really quite bad for that. You know, it's just constant, oh my God, I shouldn't eat this. And I'm, you know, going to have to go to the gym tomorrow and work this off. And so, you know, if they do say something about what they're eating, or, you know, I'm feeling so bad because I had this piece of cake, I don't just accept it or ignore it and move on, because that does in the end give permission for them to say what they want to say. I don't drive home the fact that, you know what, I am recovered from an eating disorder and you can't, you know, no. What I like to do is put it back on them. Say, oh, that's really interesting. Why do you feel that way? And, you know, play the psychologist, right? And but when you put something back on someone like that and really question why they're saying something like that, it makes them horribly uncomfortable. So they're likely going to reflect on it and just say, oh, I don't know, you know, just whatever. But they will think about it on their own time, and they will not feel comfortable saying that kind of diet culture stuff around you again in the future. So you know, at least can remove yourself from it without being really self-righteous, which sometimes is a problem. You know, and I know that there have been people, me included, who approach that water cooler talk and say, look, this is, you know, you can't just say this is wrong and blah, blah, blah. And people just look at you blankly like you're some kind of fanatic. But if you just like, oh, that's interesting. Why? Tell me more about why you feel that way. Then they have to do some examination of whether they really feel that way, or is this because I feel that I should say this? There's a lot of unpacking they can do from that, and they probably won't do it with you, but at least you've started the ball rolling.
Yeah, you're planting those seeds that, you know, may hopefully take root, because it is one of those things where if we're taught, you know, basically from birth that like we're supposed to act a certain way when it comes to food and a certain way when it comes to exercise and, you know, whatever it might be, it's hard to place individual blame on like a person who's like engaging in that culture. Because it's like, this is the culture that you've been taught. Of course they're going to engage with that culture in the way that you've been taught to. Yeah. But yeah, planting those seeds of like, maybe it doesn't have to be this way.
No, that's right. Like, let's just think about why you feel that way about food. You know, do you really feel that way? Or are you saying this because you think People Magazine is telling you to say this?
Yeah. And it is one of those things where, like, because that whole social culture around it is so pervasive and can sometimes be like very much a bonding thing as well. Like you were talking about, you know, people going for lunch and who can eat less or who can exercise more, who can feel more guilty and self-flagellate more about the food that they ate. Yeah. Like there's a lot of disordered eating that doesn't necessarily become eating disorders, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't have that like big impact on an individual's life as well.
Yeah. I always really enjoy going out for a meal with someone and eating whatever the hell I want. It may not be anything that they even notice, but for me, it's such a personal marker of recovery that I can do that and enjoy it, you know, and savor it and enjoy the food and not make any judgments about it. Just have what I want because that's what I want and that's what my body's craving.
Yeah, which is huge. That recovery piece is so huge. And this is, I know I'm looking at the time a little bit, but I'm like, this is a question I really want to ask because obviously you work a lot with people with eating disorders and you have your own experience as well. And I think we're kind of given conflicting narratives around the idea of recovery because you kind of have one camp that says, well, I guess maybe three camps. One camp that's saying like, you know, recovery is impossible. And we're trying not to listen to that camp. And then there's this other camp that says like recovery is mandatory. Like recovery is something that like, if you are not fully capable of engaging with no eating disorder behaviors, then like you need to be working harder. Mm-hmm. And then there's kind of this other camp that I'm familiar with where it's like, you know, recovery is something that we want to strive towards, but also for some people, it's may always be something that we continue to strive towards as opposed to something that we feel really comfortable in. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, I probably lean more toward the third camp. I don't think that recovery is a destination. I don't think that you have an eating disorder and then like get to a point and it's done. Certainly, you know, the behaviors, the thoughts you will have recovered from them. that doesn't mean that you're not going to have to do some work for the rest of your life to maintain that recovery. So I do like to put it in terms of maintaining recovery, because for me, at least my own experience, it's something that I work at all the time. And I may not be having those active thoughts or behaviors, but there are things that will happen that I think, especially in the line of work that I'm in, and I'm hearing other people's stories, I'll think, oh, I remember what that was like. And you can see how you could fall back into certain patterns of behaviors and thoughts, but you have the tools now to move beyond that and to do something different. But it does take work. So no, I don't think that recovery is somewhere you get to. And I know there are people that we've worked with who find that a very depressing idea. You know, they do like the idea that I'm going to do this work, I'm going to do this therapy, I'm going to go to the clinic, I'm going to take this medication, and I'm going to be better, and it will be done. This will be behind me. I like to have people tell their stories, their recovery stories, in terms of the hero's journey trope. Are you familiar with this? So this is
vaguely.
Yeah. So it's a storytelling tool that if you look at any major movie, adventure movie out there, they use this trope. So you start out with the hero. In the eating disorder scenario, it's you. But it could be The Hobbit. It could be in Star Wars. It could be Harry Potter. And so this hero is going to take a journey that's going to change them. They start out in their little hobbit hole, and then they meet Gandalf, who presents them with a challenge. They go on this challenge. They have to face darkness. They have to face the beasts, and the beasts are often in themselves. They reach sort of an abyss, which is a life and death choice. And they come through it with the support of their mentors or sidekicks, or, you know, if it's The Hobbit, it's the dwarves. If it's Star Wars, it's Chewbacca. And you then begin your recovery journey. You begin this journey to synthesize what you've learned, to fight your way back to where you were before, but it's never going to be the same place. You might arrive back at that hobbit hole, but you're not the same Bilbo Baggins who left, because you've got all this other stuff that you learned along the way. And everyone around you might be acting the same as when you left, but now you know more and you're in a different place. So recovered you is not going to be the same hero that started the story, but you're still very much the hero. And you're not at a final destination, because there'll probably be a sequel.
Oh, I love that. I could not love that more than I currently love that. And that's amazing. And I'm just like, oh, how can I tell my story in terms of the hero's journey? Because
it's a really helpful way to think about recovery, because I think very often for those of us with any mental illness, we're told that our story is the diagnosis. You know, you have anorexia, you have bipolar disorder. That becomes your definition. That becomes your story. And I know that you do so much work with the definitions as well. And that's why I think it's really important for us to reclaim our stories and reframe them, and to expand them. We're so much more than that. So that when we're telling our stories to help other people with their recovery journeys, it's not just about the dark moments and the behaviors, but it's about what you learned along the way, and what your experiences were, and the feelings when you fought that dragon, and when you came back to your hobbit hole a new, strong person. I really strongly encourage people to use that to think about their own stories.
Yeah. Oh, I'm going to be turning that over in my mind for a long time to come. I can't believe that we are out of time, because that has gone by so quickly. It's been so great talking with you. So if someone is listening to this and they're like, wow, this Michelle person is incredible, I absolutely need to be in touch, I need to hear more, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you or find out more?
People can email me at Michelle, with 2 L's, at eatingdisordersns.ca. And that's probably the fastest way to get in touch with us. And if they want more information about our online peer support, that's www.eatingdisordersns.ca.
All right, fabulous. And we will put both of those links down in the comments once the show is wrapped up in the next minute. So thank you so much for being on the show, Michelle. It has been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. This has been a lot of fun. Really great way for me to spend the beginning of my Saturday. And it was just wonderful having you on the show. So if you are watching this show and you are thinking, wow, this episode of Crazy Talk was incredible, there are all sorts of other episodes of Crazy Talk that you can tune into. They're all on my Facebook page at facebook.com/LeeThomasSpeaks. Crazy Talk goes live every Saturday at 12:30 Atlantic. Be sure to tune in next week. All right. Take care, everyone.